Hey everybody, welcome to the Dreamer's Edge podcast. I am sitting with...
Nicholas. I write video game reviews for thedreamersedge.com.
Francois, I'm a librarian and occasional writer.
And Chris, subtitler and occasional writer.
Eric, I'm a teacher and sometimes writer.
And I am Dimitri, a webmaster of thedreamersedge.com and movie critic. And welcome back to the return of the Dreamer's Edge podcast. And for the next 10 to 20 episodes, what we're going to do is we're going to go backwards in time. List to you some of the best and worst movies of each decade. Now, obviously, the current decade has just started, so we're not really going to talk about it. We're going to start with the aughts, the naughty, or how do you call them?
The naughties.
The naughties, or the zilchies. I've also heard that.
The double O's.
The double O's. Ooh, I like that one.
That's a good one, actually.
Yep. We're going to talk about the double O's first, and then we're going to go backwards in time as far as you guys can take it. So that means we're going to need audience participation. The minute you start going like, okay, these movies are too old, we don't care.
That's when we switch to old-timey radio.
Exactly.
Do we stop at like 1875 or like do we keep going?
Until it becomes cave drawings.
It's going to be like all Méliès films and like...
There's a lot of silence. I really like the silence.
But for this episode, we're going to talk about the best of the aughts, or the zilchies, or the double O's. We're each going to list our top 3 movies of the last decade. Why don't you get us started, Frank?
Actually, I'm going to start by cheating right off the bat. My number 1 is actually 3 movies. I've listed Lord of the Rings, the trilogy. Peter Jackson basically won a bunch of technical Oscars for the first 2 of the trilogy, and ended up being very rewarded for the third one. I really see it as 1 movie as opposed to 3. I've been a fan of the books for many years, so it was actually quite a treat to finally see them conveyed on screen. It was always a tremendously difficult project to undertake. He was actually surprised and shocked because it was trying to bring down the script to like maybe 3 hours, or maybe let's make it 2 movies, and then I believe New Line was like, the executive said, well, okay, it's 3 books, right? Why don't you do 3 books? And he walked away like freaking out. Oh, yes, I'm finally going to get to tell the story the way it's supposed to. Ralph Bakshi ran out of money and he was doing animation, for crying out loud. It gives you an idea of the technical scope, the difficulty of rendering it, and I find that it's really a perfect marriage of supreme technical ability and a really good script and some really good performances as well.
Well, I agree with everything you say in terms of the technical achievements of Lord of the Rings. Longtime listeners will know that Eric and I, when we did the overrated of the last decade, we listed the Lord of the Rings trilogy as...
Gasp! Was I in for that?
No, you were not. It was just
I was
Eric.
not. Okay.
There was an interesting thing about going to the movies like every year, every Christmas to go see those films. Like I kind of like that for 3 years, that you would go back like around Christmas and, okay, the next installment. Like it almost became like, I don't know how to say this, but movie TV in a sense. Like, okay, I was there in the theater.
Yeah, it was a scheduled event, and I bought the extended editions as soon as they came out. And
Yeah.
I've recently tried to watch them again, and while I like Return of the King quite a bit, still, for whatever reason, it still left me pretty flat. It's just...
Yeah, it does.
like there's not enough more to the story beyond just the spectacle, is how I almost feel. And yet I remember some really good scenes. It's weird. It's just like the books. I remember a lot of really good things from the book, but I have no desire to go back and read them again. So I don't know if it's just a moment in time. It was interesting to see someone to immerse themselves so much in the product. And they came out with something amazing. And I've been a fan of Peter Jackson since Heavenly Creatures, almost like I think maybe a decade before. Like, It's just really interesting vision and what he was able to do with really young actors and like in a limited budget. So like, what's he going to do with almost an unlimited budget? And he didn't disappoint in any way.
No.
But it's weird. Like the stories themselves just fall flat, and I've got such a big childhood love of it because of like the calendars my dad had in the garage, like the Frank Frazetta art and everything. It's just, and I loved that vision of the history of that Middle Earth.
I think I understand what you're saying, and what Dimitri was pointing out, that there is a certain, Two Towers for me, for example, is a fairly long movie. I've actually when the movies came out, I went and bought the actual extended edition. So,
But
like,
that one for Two Towers actually works better as an extended edition.
I think
Like,
it does.
it becomes a different film and a better one, but...
It is that there are moments where it's fairly long. There are moments where you can see that Jackson really wanted to be incredibly faithful to the books, and the books do have a certain rhythm, which is perhaps not ideal for movie making. But part of the reason why I list it is that to me, the movies themselves had a lasting impact on the movie industry.
Yeah,
and the way they treated the material so reverently, and it was really always a project that was deemed too expensive. But then Hollywood realized that, hey, if you actually take your time and do it right, you can make the fans happy, and you can adapt like all these books that for the longest time were not touched. And now they actually bother to say, we'll do a book, a movie. They've even gone to the extent of like, okay, well, we'll for the final book, we'll split it into two movies, which, you know, your mileage may vary on that point. You know, that might actually be a curse more than anything. Who knows? That attention for detail, which is something that you sort of, if you blink, you miss it. But if you know what it's talking about, there's a specific scene in Fellowship where the hobbits, you know, Frodo has just been stabbed by the head Nazgul dude. There's a shot where you see the trolls, which are turned in stone, which is a reference to the Hobbit. And again, this is something that's in the books. 90% of people who went there, who perhaps didn't read the book, would not know what that is. And again, this sort of, it's almost like it's a fanatical approach, practically, but it made Hollywood aware that if they actually spend the time, they can actually get, you know, the core, the hardcore fans in, and once you get those in, you can still get, you know, the rest of the audience in. You know, it's a balancing act to a certain extent. But I find that the respect for the material to me is something that I used to really hate Hollywood for that, and I see slowly but surely in certain projects a different approach now, which, I don't know, caters more to my taste, I guess.
I can see where you're going with that, but I think what Hollywood learned from this was like, okay, buy a franchise, buy the fans. And then this is right at the point where they started hanging out Comic-Con every year.
Yeah.
And then this was going to be the new surefire way to kind of get people into the audience, but that started to kind of fail them lately, you know, with a lot of, you know, projects that were really well received by the fans, by the critics, but just more people just weren't coming in. You know?
That's the thing.
If I can expand on that as well, is it's not just by the fans, but also approach the fans at a fan level. So there's sort of this creeping adolescence that sort of creeped into a lot of filmmaking. I'm thinking of something like Watchmen, when it reproduced, you know, almost frame for frame Dave Gibbons' imagery, but sort of missed entirely the point of what made Watchmen actually relevant as adult entertainment back in the day.
There's definitely a balancing act that has to be struck before you can hope for success.
Okay. Let's move on to talk about your second pick, which was Dark Knight, which I also would have put on my list. Now I have to remove it because you named it. But
I'm not going to remove it from my list.
There are two reasons that really stand out to me. Like, I mean, there are myriad of reasons, really, but the performance of Heath Ledger in that movie is unbelievable. It's rare for an actor to sort of take a role that's been done many times before, and he sort of really redefined it. He took the gloves off in a way that is, you know, incredible. But to me, what I have to say, the thing that really amazed me about Dark Knight is ultimately it's a movie that goes off the rails at one point. 2/3 of the movie in, I didn't know where this thing was heading all of a sudden. It felt like just a complete train, like a disaster that is going on right in front of you, and you don't know where it's going. And I thought that was kind of very refreshing.
I was going to say that's really what drew me to that movie in particular. I love superhero movies. I watched pretty much all of them, but this one, it was different. You really did not know what was going to happen. You can watch every other superhero movies, replace one name by another, bad guy by another. They're pretty much all the same. This one, completely different, and that's really what I enjoyed about The Dark Knight.
Yeah, I think what makes it different is there's a level of ambition. Like Chris, you've often criticized Christopher Nolan's work for being looked overly cerebral and not enough guttural, and I think that applies to Dark Knight as well. It's
Too cerebral? You think?
Well, it's very cerebral for me.
Well, it's two philosophies battling out.
Exactly, that's exactly it, and that's sort of why I think it feels different, because there's a an actual discussion of what a hero is. You know, it has that big line that they've used in the trailer, you know, about like good men become Batman and whatnot. And eventually, there's also a discussion of what a hero is, the person you need or the person you deserve, and all of that. And there's this beautiful fight scene at some point, like which is essentially almost a final action set piece where Batman and the cops sort of storm in to take out the bad guys in the building, and through circumstances that I won't spoil, Batman ends up saving the people that the cops are attacking, and he doesn't want to hurt the cops either. So here you have this conflicted figure who's now being vilified for his actions because he's attacking cops, trying to make sure nobody hurts anyone and trying to save people and all of that. And that's what a hero is. It's not, he doesn't beat up bad guys, he saves good guys, and that's the big difference here. And all of those discussions with the two set of victims
triggers.
with the triggers, all of that are all discussions of like morality and right and wrong, and that's what sort of elevated the movie for me, where it's like, it's not just the story of a person who feels guilty about something and then does the right thing. It actually discusses, well, what is the right thing, you know?
You bring very good points, like the elements of philosophy certainly, you know, bring it to a different level, like, and make it interesting. And the thing is that it's not just Batman and Joker that have a stake in it. Everybody has a stake in it. You know, it's a very different superhero movie than what we're used to, really.
Yeah, it's much more of an anti-hero movie than just a plain superhero movie. Like, fine, he's wearing a tight, you know, outfit, but, you know, they really ground it in reality, and it could be, you know, any of the 80s action heroes in a way, you know what I mean? Like, but it's just done really well, you know, and with all the nods to the fans, and it was just, it's a good movie for sure. It's fully realized. It almost feels like, you know, this is kind of where the superhero movies were going, and you don't need to necessarily continue. You can move on to the next thing, but, you know, we're obviously not. We're going to milk it for as much as we can, you know.
Well, that was one thing where you have a lot of writers that wrote pulp, then all of a sudden they were good writers that they took, like, let's say, the detective genre and brought it to something else. And I feel that Christopher Nolan did that with Batman. All of a sudden, like, The Dark Knight, it's not just a superhero movie, like, it became, like, actually a movie. It set the bar higher, and they were asking questions. And I always love that about movies, that ask questions and go, okay, that's interesting. I'm actually thinking after I come out of the theater. At the same time, I'm still going to go see Avengers and have a lot of fun seeing it.
I was going to say, and I'm going to be thankful for something like Avengers, because I do feel like, in terms of The Dark Knight, it's reflecting storylines and premises of heroism that, you know, don't allow us to follow the evolution of that thinking. You know, like, give us that childhood reverence for a little while. You know, just a little bit. You know what I mean? Because now that we've got the technology, you know what I mean? Just like Lord of the Rings, like you were saying, like, it doesn't need to be dark right away. Give us the golden age for just a little bit, and then teach me how to watch it. You know what I mean? Like, and then bring it to the next level. But it's just like, when you go straight to the dark, always, you know, you don't let the people kind of like grow with the storylines. You know what I mean? Like, and I guess, I don't know, I'm just a little bit turning away from that kind of like complete nihilism almost is almost what it comes down to. You know?
Absolutely.
But I do think that Superman should wear like a black suit in the next movie, and he should kill people, and he should like have a struggle with Bizarro Superman.
But it's because in Zack Snyder's version, we can surely hope that as a child he was adopted by the Kents who molested him.
Oh my God. Sorry, I'm laughing, but not at the molesting part. Okay, moving on. My third pick would be Before Sunset. It's a conversation movie from start to finish. They discuss various things about their lives, and, you know, you've got the odd philosophical point, and then, you know, of course, how both of those characters have gone through their lives is interesting. It's a personal pick. It's one that's near and dear to me, so it's on the list.
It's a personal pick, but it's a good movie.
Yeah,
It is a good film.
I think I've even talked about it before. You know, it's I would have put it on my list, but I kind of knew you would. So I'm glad it's out there. It's a great film. It's got one of the best sweet endings ever.
Yeah.
It's a short film, maybe 85 minutes at the most. You know, and it's just like every bit of it is just, you know, like plot points, interesting character development. You know, just and you're just there. You just want to be along for that discussion.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and there's two things that I love where they're just walking and talking. I love that. I love seeing it in films and people that are telling long stories as they're walking along, and you can see like both of them. They were like in their 20s in the first film, and then they're in their 30s in the second film, and I love that just because they're talking about their disappointment and their reality, and I was like, yeah, that's me.
There's an element of their lives, you know, that they've gone through very, very serious, very, you know, adult experiences, and there is that element which I really enjoy. You know, like they both have. They've been pleasantly surprised in some ways. You know, they're kind of happy to be where they are, but at the same time, not.
And they've gotten some of what they wanted, but recognized it's not what they needed, or you know what I mean. Like just it's like, you know, the less like yeah, exactly. Like I felt like I was aging as I was watching them, and you know, the discussions they were having when they were young were the discussions I was probably trying to have. You know. And, you know, well, I've only rarely had that in my life where, you know, you've had that really intense conversation with someone, and then you haven't seen them for years or months, or, you know, and then for whatever reason, because of that initial discussion, they're entitled to kind of ask questions that some of your closest friends just won't. And,
yeah.
You know, and it's happened once or twice, you know what I mean? But never to this level, you know what I mean? But it's just like, it is a really interesting premise for drama.
All right, who's next? Eric, you want to go next?
Yep. My number one is Christopher Nolan movie. It's 2000, but whatever. It's called Memento.
It's actually called Memento.
Memento. Sure. I chose that one just because I find the premise fascinating, and just the way that Nolan tells the story of a man that tries to solve the murder of his wife but has no short-term memory. Here's a man trying to solve a puzzle that he can't even remember all the details. So I find that fascinating.
It's a pick I didn't think of, but I think it's a really good pick in terms of... this is going to be a theme that comes up a lot in the future episodes, but, you know, when we try to pick, you know, one of the best movies of the decade, you know, one of the things we try to think of is, you know, cinema was done one way before, and then cinema is done differently before, because that movie is so important in the history of cinema, essentially. And Memento, you know, I didn't think of it, but it did change things a lot, because, you know, in the 90s, Pulp Fiction detached us from chronology, if you will. But he did it in such a nihilistic way where it's sort of like, it's like that because it's like that. Very postmodern, very much of its time. And what Nolan did is like, yeah, you can detach yourself from chronology, but it actually serves a purpose to the story, you know? It allows you to get a fuller experience and get into the head of that character in a specific case. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's one of the ones that was on my list for the same reason. You know, and I almost could liken it to maybe the best Philip K. Dick adaptation. In terms of it not being a Philip K. Dick adaptation, but it's just like, it's really got that spirit of just like, what is it? There's something strange. The world's not quite what we see, you know, but there are rules. You just need to understand them, and they're just not easy to understand. It's just like, it brings you into this world where it's like, okay, the logic makes sense here. Let me just try and figure it out now. And you're stuck at the same point of view as the character. And you're just, kind of stumbling along it. So it's a great play on the mystery, you know. Yeah. Where you're telling the story from the end.
Having said that, I just want to point out one thing. Great movie, awful special edition DVD. They decided to make the DVD a puzzle in and of itself.
Oh, yeah. That was the most annoying thing.
What did it do?
The menu is unlegible, and it's a labyrinth in itself. So it takes me half an hour before I can figure out how to play the bloody movie.
You're kidding.
Yeah, it was actually one of the first DVDs I bought for some reason. And I'm like, really? Is this what the technology does?
That explains why you didn't buy a couple for years. It's like, man, I'm not going through that again.
Anyway, your number 2 pick was again?
In the Mood for Love. Yes. So it's a story of a man and a woman that meet, and it turns out the man's wife is having an affair with the woman's husband. Oh. And both of them, they kind of strike an odd friendship where at one point they're kind of asking the question, like, should we have an affair? And you never see, like, the two guilty parties that are affairing. Both of them just talk to each other, and at one point they're in the cab, and you've got this slow song that's playing, and he kind of grazes her hand with a finger, and it becomes like very erotic. was in that move, but nonetheless, like
it was like Elvis's hips.
Nonetheless, like you got like you understood like there was this tension between them.
But that's as far as he was going to go to really acknowledge it.
Exactly, and that was so well done.
I could almost say, like, if you're a neophyte and haven't watched foreign language films before, like, you're going to understand this. You know, yeah. It makes sense, and it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, and it's got the cool, crisp look of Mad Men almost. You know, like just some of these shots and like almost the way they fetishize the clothing and the cigarettes and just like these long, slow shots, like.
Of them walking or moving up the stairs, and And my third film, The Brothers Coen, No Country for Old Men.
The Brothers Coen? Yeah. That's a choice good of words.
That's right. Yeah, so it's a film about a man that kind of stumbles onto this money, and he doesn't want to give it back, and this man is an ex-Vietnam vet. Did two tours and knows how to fend for himself, but he's got this absolute killing machine after him that uses an air gun to kill people, and who has a horrible haircut.
I will say that Bardem really nails it.
Yeah,
as Chigger. Like, I mean, that to me, it's funny. I was watching this movie and I thought, there's only one other actor that has been able to sort of manufacture that sort of heartless, cold attitude, and it's Schwarzenegger in The Terminator.
It's weird that you compare him to the Terminator, because I actually compare him more to a slasher monster to a certain degree. I saw him more as an arbitrary representation of evil, an unstoppable force that causes misery.
Yeah, the air gun, not super effective.
I like Bardem in that one a lot, but the takeaway for me was really Tommy Lee Jones, and it's just the way his voice in this one, and the way he kind of narrates events and tells stories. You really want to kind of listen to the stories, but you could hear the exhaustion, in this kind of sense of like, I'm understanding it, but I don't know how to stop it. That I can't just pick up a gun and shoot the guy because something else is going to come along. Almost like just this sense of like, what the hell is going on, and he really, really captures it, And he is a little bit a step ahead. Like, he kind of can see it coming. He can read the signs better. But it's just kind of like, what are you going to do about it?
In a way, his character is more important than the Josh Brolin character, even though Josh Brolin is the one driving the action. Because he's the character who makes you understand what you're supposed to take from the movie.
And you kind of get this sense also, like, he's seeing this new generation, if you will, of crime and everything else, and he feels out of his depth. Like, he understands what's happening, but he just doesn't really understand how these people come into being.
Is it a new generation of crime that makes him feel overwhelmed, or is it just aware of time? He's just getting old.
Well, maybe.
I think it touches on the horror, the commonplace horror that we see today. It caters to a certain extent, maybe to an idealized version of the past. But it definitely, there's that element of, okay, these kinds of horrors just did not happen back in my day or back in the old days, and now they do, and I don't understand. And it's sort of like it makes them dissociated from the modern world.
Okay, we can't talk about No Country for Old Men without discussing, the ending, the missing scene that everybody sort of made a big row about in the movie. Because the movie, in a traditional sense, you would expect to see one specific scene involving Roland's storyline, and that's been removed from the narrative. Like, how do you guys feel about that? That's in the book, of course, but was it wise to keep that sort of quirky narrative device in the movie?
But I kind of liked it, because in a sense, like, here's the sheriff getting closer, and then we see it from his perspective. And he knew the entire time this is basically how it ends. And at first, like, it threw me. Like, I was expecting to see the shootout. But then the more I thought about it, the more I said, no, I think it's a good choice.
I'd have to watch it again, but in my memory, almost the way I kind of explained that, I liked the choice. And the reason I liked the choice, justifying it, years later, is that at a certain point, there's only so much you can focus on, and the storyline does start getting more and more closed in, almost like the flipping of the coin. I like the fact that some things start getting taken out. Like, certain choices are getting taken away from you, even as a viewer. you can't be everywhere. You can't really have the empathy for all the characters. You're starting to have to choose sides as well, and that's one character who just kind of gets cut off. Like the Woody Harrelson character at one point. His storyline kind of disappears too. Like there's a lot of things, and suddenly it kind of gets to this point. And things go off into the night.
Doesn't his story get cut off because he gets shot?
Yeah, but you probably could have followed him more. Is my point. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the characters, and the brothers Coen, being the filmmakers they are, I think kind of play up also the humor in that.
I sort of interpreted a lot of Sugar, whatever his name is. Is it?
I think that's how it reads. Like, I think
Shigura.
it rhymes with trigger.
Shigura.
I always thought it was
useless.
deliberately written in a way that you're not supposed to know how to pronounce it, to be honest.
Yeah.
But anyway, like I said, I interpreted him as sort of a symbol of just bad things happening that you can't really control. And so I like the fact that it's removed because for me, it allowed me to feel really intensely Tommy Lee Jones's frustration in the movie where, that's what his career has been like. He's like, he goes out, tries himself, he puts together the facts, but there's no visceral satisfaction coming from it, and he's fed up with that. And I was feeling the same thing at the same time.
Yeah,
so
he's always coming after the fact. He's not preventing much.
So I thought it was a really effective way of making us feel what that guy was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're running disgustingly long, so we're going to end this episode here, and what we're going to do is continue our conversation next week. When Chris, Nick, and I will discuss our top 3 picks of the Double O's. So stay tuned next time. And until then, if you have any questions, comment, you want to share with us your favorite movies of the aughts, please write us at mail@thedreamersedge.com or post a comment at thedreamersedge.com. Just click on the episode name. And if you can, please write us a review on iTunes, because we are on iTunes and we love some feedback. While you're at it, why don't you get a hold of us on Facebook and Twitter, because we're there too. We're everywhere. Anyway, until next week, we'll talk to you. That doesn't actually make sense. Hey everybody, welcome to the Dreamer's Edge podcast. I am sitting with
Nicholas. I write video game reviews for thedreamersedge.com.
Francois, I'm a librarian and occasional writer.
And Chris, subtitler and occasional writer.
Eric, I'm a teacher and sometimes writer.
And I am Dimitri, a webmaster of thedreamersedge.com and movie critic. And welcome back to the return of the Dreamer's Edge podcast. And for the next 10 to 20 episodes, what we're going to do is we're going to go backwards in time. List to you some of the best and worst movies of like.
There's a lot of silence. I really like the silence.
But for this episode, we're going to talk about the best of the aughts, or the zilchies, or the double O's. We're each going to list our top 3 movies of the last decade. Why don't you get us started, Frank?
Actually, I'm going to start by cheating right off the bat. My number 1 is actually 3 movies. I've listed Lord of the Rings, the trilogy. Peter Jackson basically won a bunch of technical Oscars for the first 2 of the trilogy, and ended up being very rewarded for the 3rd one. I really see it as 1 movie as opposed to 3. I've been a fan of the books for many years, so it was actually quite a treat to finally see them conveyed on screen. It was always a tremendously difficult project to undertake. He was actually surprised and shocked because it was trying to bring down the script to like maybe 3 hours, or maybe let's make it 2 movies. And then I believe New Line was like, the executive said, well, okay, it's 3 books, right? Why don't you do 3 books? And he walked away like freaking out. Oh, yes, I'm finally going to get to tell the story the way it's supposed to. Ralph Bakshi ran out of money and he was doing animation, for crying out loud. It gives you an idea of the technical scope, the difficulty of rendering it, and I find that it's really a perfect...
Each decade. Now, obviously, the current decade has just started, so we're not really going to talk about it. We're going to start with the aughts, the naughty, or how do you call them?
The naughties.
The naughties, or the zilchies. I've also heard that.
The double O's.
The double O's. Ooh, I like that one.
That's a good one, actually.
Yep. We're going to talk about the double O's first, and then we're going to go backwards in time as far as you guys can take it. So that means we're going to need audience participation. The minute you start going like, okay, these movies are too old, we don't care.
That's when we switched to old-timey radio.
Exactly.
Do we stop at like 1875 or like do we keep going?
Until it becomes cave drawings.
It's going to be like all Méliès films and...
Perfect marriage of supreme technical ability and a really good script and some really good performances as well.
While I agree with everything you say in terms of the technical achievements of Lord of the Rings, longtime listeners will know that Eric and I, when we did the overrated of the last decade, we listed the Lord of the Rings trilogy as...
Gasp! Was I in for that?
No, you were not. It was just
I was
Eric
not.
and I.
Okay.
There was an interesting thing about going to the movies like every year, every Christmas to go see those films. Like I kind of like that for 3 years that you would go back like around Christmas and okay, the next installment. Like it almost became like I don't know how to